My name is Alan Willow. What I'm about to recount are the horrifying events that happened to my girlfriend and me in the month of August 2021. The things I'm about to tell you took place in a town hidden in the woodlands of Norfolk. Norfolk is a farming county that is known to have the greatest concentration of medieval churches than anywhere else on Earth. To the south, it has the largest forest in Great Britain. It's a great place for outdoor enthusiasts to explore, but there is a darker, sinister secret hidden in its ancient forest. There is a tiny hidden town where something abodes, worshipping the dark rather than the light. I'm sharing this with you to warn you to take care next time you decide to visit an Airbnb in a woodland town. It was a sizzling hot summer that year. The heat in the city with all its people, buildings and machinery made the atmosphere suffocating. I needed to escape it all. I decided to take a trip with my beautiful girlfriend, Amber. She was extraordinarily beautiful and way out of my league. She had dark, straight hair, mysterious eyes, and I swear she almost glowed. She worked as a doctor in a hospital where we lived. That's where I was lucky enough to meet her, but that's a story for another time. I searched online for a rental home in the countryside, a private location away from the busy city we lived in. I found the rental on an Airbnb website. The large, modern, beautiful mansion was a steal for the listed price. In the pictures advertised, it had grand rooms with really high ceilings, a library, winding staircases, attic bedrooms, and magnificent wooden fireplaces. It looked like a modern mansion, fit for royalty. On our trip, we brought along our Brittany dog, Brittany being the breed and not her name. Brittany is a breed of gun dog bred primarily for bird hunting, hence her name Bullet. Although Amber and I wouldn't dare hurt a fly, let alone use our beloved dog Bullet for hunting. Bullet was a very brave, intelligent dog, and lives for attention from Amber and me. She had never bitten or growled at anyone that didn't deserve it. Although she once put herself between a stalker and my beloved Amber. Long ago, one chilling night, Amber was walking Bullet alone in the dark. I was unfortunately busy at work. Midway on their walk, Bullet suddenly stopped and froze up in front of Amber, refusing to walk any further. She started growling at the path that continued a few feet ahead. Before Amber reached the end of the path, fortunately spotted an aged hand and a pale face, peeking around a bush, staring at her. It was an older man, hiding and spying on her, eerily smiling. I believe this guy could have been following her and obviously had bad intentions. Nobody else was around. You hear all these stories about people going missing, being raped or murdered brutally. Lucky for Amber, Bullet chased the creep off. But unlucky for Bullet, the man didn't go quietly. The guy had put up quite the fight, injuring our brave Bullet. I couldn't tell you what happened to the creep. Before Amber could go investigate, Bullet limped back to her and was rushed off to the vet's. The vet used pins to align the bones in Bullet's leg. Since then, she has recovered, but Bullet isn't as brave anymore after the horrific incident. She seems a little quieter now. However, I don't doubt for a second she would take a bullet for me and Amber. Being early risers, we departed from home and began our drive to our destination early that morning. Amber on the passenger front seat and Bullet on the back seats, staring out of the car windows for most of the journey, wagging her tail with joy. The weather being hot, we were able to leave the windows halfway down most of the trip. The fresh air felt nice and cool. The long drive took up the entire daylight. As we got closer to our destination, I noticed the roads became quieter, till eventually they were completely desolated. Not a soul in sight. We passed the nearest active road miles ago. Besides the radio, we had only each other's company, exchanging stories of our daily lives at work. I knew we were close when the forest became dense with centuries-old trees on either side of the road. We finally reached the town at dusk. It was an extremely small town centered between hills, covered in thick forest, in the middle of nowhere, miles away from anywhere else that mattered. A row of old, neglected houses and small local stores lined each side of the road we drove in on. The town was small enough for me to see the end from where we drove in. At the end was the alluring mansion we had rented. It stuck out like a sore thumb amongst the old, weathered buildings. It had a huge black iron fence protecting it. Protecting it from what, I wondered? As we approached closer, the magnificent gate entrance came into view. The gate could have been close to a height of 12 feet, with huge, detailed dog-like statues on either side guarding it. It was beautiful, but eerie. My thoughts were interrupted when Bullet began to growl at two figures that emerged from the darkness. A woman and an old man slowly walked towards my driver's side and aggressively knocked on the car window for me to lower it. From what I could tell, the woman looked to be in her early 30s. The man, much older.
Alan?
Asked the woman. The old man stood behind her holding a lantern high, the light illuminating his face but casting a dark shadow over hers. "Hello," I replied, excited. She put her hand through the open car window and handed me a red envelope. She glared at Bullet in the back seat and said,
"Everything you need for your stay is in there, including how to operate the air conditioning, alarms and safety deposit box. There isn't any Wi-Fi out here. The signal is blocked by the hills and trees, so you will have to put up with a landline and dial up. Also inside is a magnetic key for the entrance and my husband's phone number, should you need anything for the duration of your stay."
Before I could say thank you, the woman turned around and marched towards the gate doors, with her husband, I assume, closely following behind her heels. The woman, almost as if she were supervising, watched her husband open the iron gate, one heavy iron door at a time.
"Maybe she's having a bad day?"
murmured Amber, smiling. Both the groundskeepers eerily stared at us as I drove the car through the gate entrance. The car tires made crackling sounds as I drove carefully over the dirt road. I watched them from my rear-view mirror until they faded into the background. The fortified mansion looked magnificent. The driveway, made of cobblestone, accompanied by rows of glowing lanterns illuminating the private road. The mansion had large curtained windows set in solid concrete walls. Above the entrance protruded an enormous terrace supported by thick, tall stone pillars. It was like something I had never seen before. I parked the car in the motor court that was big enough to park half a dozen cars. Stepping out of the vehicle, I felt tiny in contrast to my surroundings. I opened the rear door to let excited Bullet out. She sprung out and ran to Amber. We walked up to the entrance and stood before the giant front doors. Bullet was impatiently spinning circles around us and wagging her tail. Amber, excited herself, said,
"I can't wait to see what's inside."
as she examined the entrance. The oversized French doors seemed to be made of dark wood. They had frosted thick glass embedded in the middle that increased privacy by blocking the view into the mansion while allowing natural light access inside. I used the magnetic key from the red envelope by pressing it against a steel square box on the right-hand side of the enormous doors. The doors unlocked, making a deep clunk sound that I felt vibrate deep in my body. "This is so nuts! Look at this place!" I whispered as I pushed the heavy door open to reveal a marvelous wonder, the Great Room. The Great Room was an open hallway, the centerpiece, a grand staircase that led to the second floors. Beneath my feet, a red carpet that led to and up the stairs. The ceiling had a fresco like the Vatican's Sistine Chapel, except this fresco was based on fairy tale characters, Snow White and the Dwarfs, Beauty and the Beast, Peter Pan, to name a few. I wondered what the significance of this beautiful art was. Our first night at the mansion began wonderful. Amber and I did a lot of exploring, acting like we were real estate brokers, showcasing luxurious properties on YouTube. We joked around exploring one room to another. We locked away our car keys into the safety deposit box that was on the second floor. We didn't explore the entire building. We gave up once we found the hot tub outside. The hot tub was in the backyard. It was perfect for Amber and me to celebrate our vacations, first night under the stars.
"It's so nice out here. I'm glad we did this."
Amber said, staring up at the stars in the sky, a promise of life in the darkness. I wondered to myself how many ancient civilizations had looked up at the starlit night and appreciated the beauty of the universe. I feel like we are in a fantasy right now, I said, watching her enjoy the tub in her bikini, only her shoulders and head above the water.
I hope we see a shooting star.
What would you wish for?
Nothing, I already have you.
Easy there, cheesy. We laughed together.
I'd wish we could do this all the time.
Enjoy it while it lasts, my love. Soon we will be back to the city. Maybe one day we could move out here and have our own family, I said, watching Amber smile at me, glowing. The steam from the hot tub coming off her body almost looked like a halo surrounding her. Just before we called it a night, we received an unanticipated visit from one of the groundskeepers. It was the old man that accompanied the groundskeeper lady earlier when we had first arrived. He introduced himself this time as Mr. Bennett, and he confirmed the woman was his wife, Mrs. Bennett. He looked like a stereotypical farmer. Straw hat, white overgrown hair lapping over his ears, his skin old and dried out by the sun, almost looked like leather. He had an ungroomed white shabby beard and pale blue eyes. He looked like a man that had almost lost the will for any desire until he saw my Amber.
Sorry about earlier. I wanted to properly introduce myself. I wanted to also tour you around the property, but my wife needed me to address an issue.
He explained. He seemed like the nicer one between the couple, but was still stern. He walked us around, showed us where the many kitchens, bathrooms, and the choice of half a dozen bedrooms were. All the bedrooms were located up the grand red carpeted staircase on the second floor. The hallways and rooms were decorated with huge oil paintings hanging on the walls. Like the fresco, the paintings were of fairy tale figures and scenes. Hey, just out of curiosity, what's with the Disney theme? I asked cautiously, not to offend Mr. Bennett.
The owner is obsessed with fables and myths.
Oh, is he a writer?
A scientist, actually. His daughter loved fairy tale stories. He loved reading them to her. He loved her dearly. Sadly, due to tragic circumstances, she passed away at an early age. I guess after his loss, he clings on to the things she loved.
That's so tragic.
Said Amber, examining a painting of Red Riding Hood.
He must be quite successful to afford all this.
He is,
Answered Mr. Bennett quickly.
He and his wife don't live here in this town anymore. In the end, I assume the memory of his loss, his grief was too much to bear. A constant reminder of painful emotions that were so severe he couldn't resume his own life.
He said, trying not to stare at my beautiful, inquisitive Amber. We walked Mr. Bennett back to the entrance after he was done showing us the tour.
It's been nice talking with you. You seem like a really nice couple. That includes you too,
said Mr. Bennett, stroking Bullet's head roughly.
Just a couple rules before I leave you. 1. I suggest you don't go outside after dark. It's not safe. Lots of wild animals out there. 2. Don't pay attention to noises outside. Don't go investigating. 3. Keep the doors locked always, even when you're home. And number 4, don't tell my wife I told you about the rules. She'd think I'm trying to scare you off. Stay safe.
He tipped his hat as to say bye, smiled at Amber, and quickly rushed off, disappearing into the darkness. Don't go outside after dark. Don't go investigating noises outside. What could be out there?
I found that a little odd, too. He's nice, but he seems a little sad. Almost as if he can relate to the owner of this home. He described it so passionately. Either that or something is troubling him.
Added Amber, sounding a little concerned for Mr. Bennett's well-being. We went to bed soon after, exhausted from our travel. The bedroom we chose to sleep in was located on the front side of the property, on the second floor, above the house's main entrance. We left the window open and fell asleep, feeling the cool breeze and listening to the sounds of crickets and owls. That's when I first experienced something frightening. I was woken up suddenly in the night, searching the dark for what had disturbed me. It was a deep, frightening howl. The sounds of owls and crickets were suddenly absent. Amber remained asleep, the full moon's light from the window illuminating her. Then I heard a different sound. It was a scratching sound from outside. It was coming from the front entrance. Did I forget Bullet outside? I questioned myself as usually Bullet would be sleeping at our feet. I quickly creeped out of the bedroom, trying not to wake Amber. The floorboards felt cool beneath my bare feet. The scratching continued. "Bullet, I'm coming, girl," I whispered as I made my way down the stairs to the front entrance in the dark, in the silence, my footsteps silenced by the thick red carpet. That's when I saw Bullet inside the hallway, laying upright, like an ancient Egyptian Anubis sitting dog statue, frozen staring up at the front entrance doors. Outside the doors, I could see through the frosted glass a large black shadow scratching at the bottom corner of the door, like a dog, but it wasn't a dog at all. It was too large for that. The heavy door shook slightly as this thing dug its claws into the gap underneath and between where the double doors met. Bullet still lay frozen, staring at it, almost submissive, like she knew she was helpless and no match against this thing that was trying to get in. I felt panic and anxiety that it would make it inside. I felt terror. My legs felt weak. I was trembling, waiting for what would follow next. Thank God I took Mr. Bennett's advice seriously and locked these doors before bed. I needed to turn the light on. Maybe the light would deter this huge animal? I took steps towards the light switch, which was located on the wall next to the doors. That's when it all went wrong. The floor beneath my foot creaked under my body weight, and the scratching stopped. Complete silence. I froze. I looked at the shadow. It also froze. That's when it slowly stood up tall. It was bigger than I thought. It stood almost as tall as the entrance doors. It had to be over 7 feet. I could now make out its silhouette. Its head was shaped like a Doberman, huge pointed ears. It sniffed the air, pointing its nose up, taking deep breaths. The sound of it sniffing was frightening. My fight or flight response kicked in, and my body chose flight. I ran to the light switch. As I did, suddenly the beast attacked and attempted to crash up against the doors. I felt the power of its weight vibrate through my body. The solid doors vibrated violently, but thankfully stayed closed. I turned the light on and ran through the hallway towards the kitchen to arm myself. Bullet followed me, whimpering. Turning the light on was a bad idea. The light now made it impossible for me to see outside through windows. I could only see my own reflection as I ran past each window. I could hear this thing on the other side following me with its heavy footsteps thudding on the floor. It was obvious it could now see inside, but I could no longer see out. Once in the kitchen, I made sure to leave the light off, making sure the beast couldn't see inside through the kitchen windows. I grabbed the biggest knife I could find from on top of the counter and hid kneeling underneath one of the kitchen countertops together with Bullet. I could hear my own heart beating, almost like my heart was in my head between my ears. I watched up out of the window that was a few feet across me. That's when I saw it. It was a huge beast with a dog head. It very slowly creeped past the window, with its ears perked upright, its sharp teeth covered in drool, its huge amber eyes in dark sockets glowed. Its ear twitched, and it froze for a moment. That's when it slowly turned and looked at me. I knew it could see me. It smiled, not moving at all. I was struck by the feeling of terror, and my legs felt paralyzed. Why was it just smiling at me? Pumped with adrenaline, I was able to gain enough courage to run back towards the bedroom. I had to get to my Amber and barricade ourselves in the bedroom. I ran as fast as I could. Bullet, obviously being faster, kept pace with me, guarding me. I saw Amber halfway down the stairs already. She must have woken up to investigate the banging noises the beast made from trying to get in.
What's going on?
She shrieked. "Run back upstairs," I ordered. Without question, she ran ahead of me. We all sprinted up together, ran into the bedroom, slammed and locked the door. I called the police from the bedside phone, but they had told me they wouldn't be there for hours, us being in the middle of nowhere, the nearest town being miles away. After I hung up the phone, I noticed the sounds from outside had suddenly returned to normal. The noise of crickets chirping, owls hooting again. The beast had gone, I thought. The police finally arrived a few hours later and told us that it was most likely a wild animal since they weren't uncommon in the area. The Bennetts also accompanied the police. Mrs. Bennett seemed more bothered that she had to wake up and was compelled to help rather than willing to. Her hair a mess, a cigarette hanging out of her mouth.
Wolves wouldn't be able to get in. This place is built like a fortress. You city folk have been wrapped in cotton wool your whole lives. Who calls the police in the middle of the night for a fox or whatever outside, scratching the door?
Said Mrs. Bennett resentfully. Mr. Bennett didn't say anything the entire time. He just stood in the back like a piece of furniture, his head slightly lowered, arms crossed, hiding from any attention. The police reassured us that we would be safe. A wild animal or wolf was probably hungry, desperate searching for food, and that we have Bullet to protect us. The officer convinced me. I guess it could have been a wolf, but I swear it stood upright bipedal. I was tired, and my fear made my overactive imagination see things that weren't there. Plus, werewolves don't exist. Police asked me to call again if the animal returns, and to make sure all doors and windows are locked. Also, the Bennetts agreed to keep an eye out and that they had the necessary means to deal with the wild animal should it return. The officers then made a few comments about the beautiful mansion and then left together with the unhappy Bennetts. Amber and I woke up just before noon the next day. Even though we slept in much later than usual, I felt exhausted after last night's events. The sunlight made me feel better, though. It washed away all the horrible memories of last night, and I felt safe again. Amber and I went on our routine dog walk with Bullet. We made sure we locked all the doors and closed all the windows before we left. The sun was warm on my skin, birds were singing, butterflies fluttered with Bullet playfully chasing them. My beloved Amber was smiling at me as she made small talk to get my mind off things. The scenery was perfect, surrounded by trees and blue skies. Life felt perfect again. We decided to go to a cafe in town for a late breakfast. Walking through town, we noticed we were being watched by the locals. I can't imagine they get much tourism in this tiny town, so I wasn't surprised, but still it made me a little uncomfortable. We finally found a cafe called the Devil's Bowl, the only cafe in town. A small, crumbled, old-looking building. Inside, the welcome scent of coffee wafted through the air. The place was spacious but busy. Everyone stopped and stared as Amber, Bullet, and I entered. We found an empty seat at one of the closest tables to the barista. Once I sat down, the guests continued talking and eating. I'm guessing they were talking about us, but I didn't care because I was too hungry and wasn't going to let a few judgmental people ruin my perfect morning. I picked up the menu and quickly scanned through it. A moment later, the waitress walked over and asked,
"So what's it gonna be?"
her notepad and pen ready, winking at Amber. Amber ordered toast, fried eggs with hash browns and a tea. I ordered the full English with a coffee. Later, when our food arrived, the waitress serving us said,
"Your meal is on the house, courtesy of Mr. Bennett."
She stepped aside, allowing me to see Mr. Bennett sitting a few tables away. He tipped his hat at us. "I'm going to go thank him," I said to Amber, and walked over to his table. When I got close enough, I noticed Mr. Bennett had a bruise on his cheek and a swollen lip. I didn't ask him about it because I didn't want to be rude, but it looked like he had been through his own rough night. "Good morning, and thank you for breakfast. How are you?" I asked him, smiling.
Afternoon.
He corrected me.
I see you followed my advice last night, keeping your doors locked.
He smugly said, ignoring my question. He was right. His rules saved our lives. As I was about to invite Mr. Bennett to join me and Amber at our table, I noticed Mrs. Bennett walking over, returning from the bathroom, I assumed.
Is there anything else we can help you with?
She frowned at me.
You two are turning out to be quite the high-maintenance couple.
I felt like this bitter lady had no intention of encouraging guests to return to the rental property, or she's naturally an unhappy person. I could see a change in Mr. Bennet's behavior in the presence of Mrs. Bennet, almost like he was afraid of her.
What's your plans for today, then?
She asked, interrupting my thoughts. Amber and I are going to go explore the woods.
You and your beautiful girlfriend be careful out there. We don't want anything to happen to Red Riding Hood,
said Mrs. Bennet, glaring at her own husband. I had a feeling she was insinuating that he had a crush on my Amber, but I wasn't surprised or bothered.
Are you taking your mutt with you?
Yes, Bullet will be with us.
Careful now.
We will be, I said, and turned around, walking back to Amber. I could tell this lady really didn't like us, and I wasn't going to stand there and listen to her bullshit. After our late breakfast, Amber and I packed our backpacks with all the necessities we needed for our hike in the thick forest. We checked the forecast, and to no surprise, it would be 30 degrees for the duration of our trip. It's a bit on the hotter side, but we dressed accordingly, wearing loose-fitting clothes. It felt good to get away from Mrs. Bennet and the rest of that miserable town. I bet poor Mr. Bennet wishes he could do the same. I love hiking as it's a good way to keep fit and clears my mind. But after what happened yesterday, I was a bit paranoid. As we walked along vigorous trails and footpaths through the forest, I was scoping out the shadows for a possible wolf. The path was littered with broken branches and stones. I'm guessing that the path hadn't been maintained in some time. The wind flowed through the trees, leaves rustled, birds were singing, and the insects were humming. Bullet walked in front of us, and I was using her like a radar. I knew she would detect anything out of the ordinary before me.
Is everything okay?
Asked Amber, walking beside me, smiling, but had a slight concerned look on her face. Yeah, I'm just, thinking to myself. It's nothing. I tried hiding my paranoia.
About what?
We might stumble onto the witch's candy house in Hansel and Gretel. Amber found that funny. It was one of her favorite movies we enjoyed watching together years ago.
Werewolves and now witches? When are you going to grow up?
We laughed together and continued to explore, having fun, until I noticed the forest began to get quieter and darker. The sun rays barely made it through the thick canopy of trees. The birds stopped singing. I could smell something putrid and foul. My muscles began to tighten up. I knew something was wrong. Just then, Bullet ran ahead without us. Amber and I ran after her. We followed Bullet through overgrown bushes, ferns, and branches into a clearing hidden from the path. In the center, a scrapyard surrounded by a barbed wire fence. I would say the yard was big enough to park a dozen cars. The fence was broken in areas and had lost tension in the wires. There was enough of a gap for me and Amber to pass through.
Careful, Alan. Some of this stuff looks so old and rusty. I don't want either of us getting tetanus.
I'll be okay, babe. Besides, I'm immunized, I said, cheekily smiling. The yard was littered with old rusty cars, abandoned suitcases, belts, boots, and other personal items. It was odd that all these items would be collected out here. Bold crows and magpies picked at the discarded rubbish. They didn't seem at all bothered by us being there. The forest floor was littered with what would have previously been white papers. I watched Amber pick one up.
These are missing posters, Alan,
she said with a horrified look on her face. I picked up one myself. She was right. The paper I was holding had a picture of a young woman, her age, height, and other statistics written alongside the picture of her face. In bold, large writing across the top, it read, "Missing." Amber walked towards me and held out the paper she was holding to compare posters. The missing poster she had was of a different person.
Oh my God, there are so many missing people.
She was right. The missing posters scattered on the ground had different faces on them. I started searching through one of the trunks of a blue car. It seemed in relatively good condition compared to the rest of all the other abandoned cars. The vehicle's number plate was a 2020 plate, just last year's. The trunk and front door had been left open prior to us being here. Inside the trunk, I found a bunch of clothes and a leather wallet. I opened it to find credit cards and a driver's license inside. It belonged to some guy. Before I could continue investigating, I was interrupted by Bullet barking at something. Me and Amber cautiously ran across the junkyard, avoiding sharp objects. stepping over and between them to see what Bullet had found. Bullet appeared to be digging up some sort of fabric. On closer inspection, I realized that it was a pile of clothes, jeans, bra, and t-shirt. I picked them up, but then immediately dropped them back down onto the decaying leaves on the forest floor. The clothes were covered in blood. If that wasn't bad enough, I also noticed something unusual. I realized that the jeans and bra had been cut in a way that suggested to me that they had been forcibly removed from someone. "Do you think a serial killer did this? Maybe someone from the town?" I quietly asked. Amber, with her hands on her hips, seemed calm considering the circumstances. I, on the other hand, was ready to get the hell out of there and call the police again.
I think we should investigate some more. We might find someone that needs our help. Hello? Anybody here?
Shh. A psycho could still be around, I said, frantically searching my surroundings. "We should just leave it to the police," I whispered to her. I felt goosebumps raise the hairs on my arms and neck. I was suspicious somebody was hiding, watching us. Thankfully, the postcard-perfect sky changed. Thick gray clouds gathered together, and it started to rain. It was an excuse for us to make our way back to the mansion and report what we had found to the local police.
You're probably right. And whoever is responsible for this could return.
The rain became more intense. The sound of raindrops drummed against the canopy, and the sound of thunder rumbled the sky above. We rushed back towards the mansion. The only phone to contact the police would be the landline in the mansion. When we got back, the sight of the Grand Wolf statues made me hesitate a moment before making my way onto the property grounds. They reminded me of the wild animal that tried breaking in last night. We quickly ran through the courtyard towards the mansion. When I reached the front door, I noticed it was open.
I'm sure you locked the door before we left, right?
My adrenaline surged and my heart rate jumped. I was scared. I took the lead and quietly creeped inside. Inside, I could see muddy boot prints. I followed a set that led into the kitchen. Written on the kitchen wall in blood was a message that terrified me. Amber walked in behind me with Bullet now on a lead and read the message out loud.
I'm upstairs.
We both looked at each other, Amber no longer confident as she had been. "I have to go upstairs to call the police," I hesitantly said. Amber held onto my arm tightly to stop me.
It's not safe. We should just leave.
She whispered to me. "The car keys are upstairs in the safety deposit box," I reminded her.
Let's go tell Mr. Bennett. We can use his phone.
Relieved, I agreed with Amber. We quietly made our way out of the kitchen back into the hallway. Before we reached the front door to make our escape, we heard a heavy thud upstairs. It was the sound of heavy footsteps and sent a shiver through my body. We bolted for the exit. We slammed the front door shut behind us as we ran outside in the heavy rain. It was dark now. Dripping drops of rain drummed on my head as I held onto Amber's hand, pulling her as we fled in fear, escaping whatever was inside the mansion. Behind us, I heard the entrance doors explode open. I looked back and finally saw the beast in all its glory, a mutant combination of a human and wolf. Its black fur body, shiny and matted from the rain, its terrifying dog head held up by a thick, muscular neck. It stood tall and bipedal, long fingers with frightening long claws. It charged towards us at an impossible speed, running on all four limbs. Bullet ran back at the beast, facing it head-on to protect us, but the beast ran straight through her like she was nothing. Bullet's body ragdolled through the air into a bush out of sight. My poor Bullet. I had no choice but to continue running. My priority now was only to protect Amber, but with the sound of crackling thunder, I felt a horrendous, hard knock against my body. I saw myself fly through the air. In complete silence, my world turned upside down. It all seemed like it was happening in slow motion. The sound of rain was gone, until I felt my body crash on the hard forest floor, skidding, only coming to a stop once my back crashed up against a tree. Then everything was still. I could hear the rain again. The sound of it calmed me. I couldn't move. My arms and legs felt cold, but I could feel warmth across my stomach. I looked down at myself and saw blood covering my entire torso. It took me a few seconds, but finally my brain caught up with what had happened. I had been knocked through the air by the beast. His claws had ripped my stomach open. I could hear Amber screaming my name in the distance, and I could feel heavy footsteps walking towards me. The beast stood towering over me, smiling and ready to finish the job. I wanted to move so I could help Amber, but I couldn't. I knew I was dying, and I was powerless against this beast that stood before me. It raised its giant hand above its head, its razor claws soaked in my blood, shining in the moonlight, ready to deliver the final blow. I heard a pop sound. I was confused. The beast stood frozen in front of me, its large yellow eyes lifeless. I saw a small hole in its chest that quickly filled with its own blood. The blood began to gush out. Then the beast body fell and slumped on the ground. It wasn't moving. Behind it stood Mr. Bennett, his rifle still raised, pointing at the beast. Amber ran towards me, dropped to her knees, and applied pressure to my open wound.
You're going to be okay. I just need to keep pressure on this and we're going to call for help.
She was in shock and had become a doctor treating her patient. I wanted to tell her that I loved her, but I couldn't.
His dying,
Said Mr. Bennett, walking towards us. At his feet now lay a dead woman. The beast's body had transformed into a naked woman.
like my wife here.
He said, poking his wife's body on the floor with the rifle barrel, making sure she was dead.
She was a werewolf. No, she was a bitch. She made me do all her dirty work. Do you know how many bodies I had to hide? Their clothes, their cars, their blood and guts. She's killed dozens of people like you who have come to stay at that mansion, tore them to shreds. Ungrateful bitch treated me like shit too, so I shot her with the only thing that could kill her, a silver bullet.
I can still save Alan. Please call an ambulance.
Begged Amber, still applying pressure, desperately trying to keep me alive. Her professional doctor persona was washed away by the tears that rolled down her cheeks.
He's going to die. Let me put him out of his misery. It will be painless, believe me.
Said Mr. Bennett, raising his rifle again, pointing it at my face.
Please don't. Please stop this. Help us.
Listen, he has nothing left to offer you. His bones are broken and some shattered. He's bleeding to death. Even if he survived, he would never be able to move again. You would be feeding him through a straw. Is that what you want?
Said Mr. Bennett.
I will look after you and treat you well. I have money and I can provide you with anything you need.
Please help him.
Begged Amber.
I am.
Said Mr. Bennett. I watched him aim down the sights of his rifle. His face expression was stone cold, but before he could pull the trigger, I saw my bullet jump through the air, landing a bite on Mr. Bennett's neck. Mr. Bennett dropped his rifle and began wrestling Bullet to the ground. Bullet's jaws wrapped around his neck. She violently shook her head, mauling him, until Mr. Bennett laid still. I watched Amber cry as she continued to try slowing down my bleeding. Bullet walked over to me, nudging her head under my hand for me to stroke her. My silver bullet saved us. I knew she would. That's when the world slowly dimmed until my vision went completely black. Goodbye, Bullet. Goodbye, my Amber.